Hey everybody, welcome back to my new series, How to Model a Gold Mill in 27,000 Easy Steps. Today's episode, before we go deep into the construction of the model itself, I wanted to kind of review some of the history of the area. It was known as the Argentine Mining District, and there was a railroad going up to almost 14,000 feet at one time, and there was a town called Waldorf. And if you understand the history of those, how all that played out, and then see where the Santiago Mill came into the picture, it kind of, in my view at least, I think it gives a much better idea of what the historical significance of all this is and why I'm taking an interest in it. Next time, I want to go deeper into the Santiago Mill itself, kind of do a tour of what's in there and why, and kind of get a feel for how the model is going to be built up. But today's episode, we're going to focus mainly on the historical aspects, and I hope you'll find that as interesting as I do. Steam locomotives were once a familiar sight in the Rocky Mountain regions, just as they were on the plains. Until practical automobiles became common in the 1920s and 1930s, a steam-powered train was the best way to transport something without otherwise needing a saddle and a reliable supply of hay. The video segment here is a narrow-gauge tourist train that still runs between Georgetown and Silver Plume, using a now diesel-converted locomotive similar to what operated in the region in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While driving a modern four-wheel drive vehicle up the washed-out and circuitous Leavenworth Creek Road toward the Waldorf town site, it is difficult to imagine a train taking this route. But in the early 1900s, the principal mine owner in the Argentine region, one Edward J. Wilcox, grew tired of relying on a pack mule to access his office in Waldorf during the winter and laid plans for the Argentine Central Railway. Construction of the narrow-gauge design began in 1905 to connect Silver Plume to Waldorf and was completed the following year. At the time, it was the highest smooth rail train system in the world. With the railroad now ensuring reliable access, the U.S. Postal Service established a Waldorf post office in 1906. At over 11,000 feet above sea level, it was one of the highest post offices ever established in the United States. For most of its life, the railway relied on Shay locomotives, a design that used a special gear drive to both the front and rear wheels in order to permit the front truck assembly, or both the front and rear if desired, to take drive power while pivoting independently. Using the patented design of inventor Ephraim Shay, the design permitted a smooth rail steam engine to navigate tight track turns and steep grades that would not be accessible to traditional locomotive designs. This close-up of a Shay-type unit, now housed in a Pennsylvania museum, clearly shows the gear drive mechanisms to both the front and rear wheels, as well as a clear view of the prismatic joint that allowed the front drive shaft to slide back and forth as the front truck pivoted around sharper turns. Besides cargo transport to Waldorf, one of the railroad's money-making ventures was tourism. Built to take passengers to the top of McClellan Mountain for a 14er experience, future plans included additional track across the saddle to nearby Gray's Peak, and then later continued to Keystone and beyond. In both summer and winter, regular tourist groups ascended the heights to, as they thought, 14,007 feet above sea level. In reality, better geographic data later established McClellan's highest point as 13,588 feet. Perhaps the real mystery is not how this mountain was mismeasured, but rather how, even at the actual elevation, this particular chap found enough wind in his lungs to keep a cigar lit. As it happened, Wilcox's timing for his new railroad could not have been worse. In October 1907, a financial panic in the New York Stock Exchange spread across the U.S. and Wilcox was wiped out and sold his railroad for a paltry sum in 1908. The railroad went through 2 more owners and a sheriff's sale in the following years, and did not run trains at all during 1911 or 1912, by which time Waldorf itself was starting to wind down to its eventual abandonment. The post office was closed in 1912. The train route, operating as the Argentine and Grays Peak Railway in its final years, continued into 1918 under subsequent owners but was never profitable enough to survive or expand. It was shut down in late 1918, and in the summer of 1919 the tracks were removed. The railway existed for just 12 years and operated during only 10 of them. Waldorf predated the railroad, although all supplies prior to then would have been brought in by wagons during fair weather and pack mules in the harsh winter months. A trio of prospectors had discovered silver-bearing ores in McClellan Mountain in 1864, representing the first large discovery of silver in the Colorado Territory. By 1868, Waldorf was founded around what we believe to be the Big Stevens mine. The Argentine Mining District, named after the Latin word for silver, grew as new tunnels were bored along the range. Georgetown, established just 10 years earlier during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, found a new reason for existing as a supply stop for the growing silver industry. The road over the pass itself was begun as a toll road project in 1869, but was later purchased by Clear Creek and Summit counties to be used as a public road. Today, the west side of the pass is unmaintained and mostly inaccessible due to weathering and slides, but the 13,207-foot high Argentine Pass can still be summited from the Waldorf side. In addition to pictures on tourism postcards printed during the railroad's day, some photographs of Waldorf remain and are attributed, with some uncertainty, to Louis Charles McClure, a Western photographer who documented Denver and the surrounding region from the late 1890s to the 1920s. The image featuring both the train and the post office would have necessarily been captured sometime between 1906 and 1910. Another view from the upslope side was likely taken around the same time, and another large mining operation can be seen in the distance. From the other mine location, Waldorf is visible looking back down the valley, showing another view of the millworks and other operations surrounding the larger mine. As railroad tracks are visible, this again would have been taken sometime after 1906. The location from which this photograph is taken can still be accessed today, but, as with the rest of the town site, only ore rubble and bits of random scrap remain as evidence of past human activity. So far, we have located only one photo of the original mine entrance with its surrounding structure. Given the long and harsh winter conditions above 10,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains, the covered transition from the hillside to the milling area was a logical and very sensible arrangement. Edward Wilcox had a sometime business partner named William Rogers. Rogers is believed to have staked his claim for the Santiago Mine in 1899. He also helped Wilcox establish the Argentine Central Railroad. Since the Santiago Mill was not built until 1935, ore coming from the many incursions of McClellan Mountain needed a place to go, and Waldorf was the closest mill, with, among other things, the necessary water supply. Unfortunately, the most direct route to Waldorf was also extremely rugged. The solution was to move the ore downhill by first collecting it at a large chute at a suitable location of rolling meadowland about 1/2 mile up the steep grade from Waldorf. The chute, constructed using hand-hewn materials in the pioneer style, was also equipped with cast iron rigging for a cable hoist. The ore was then ferried down for milling in Waldorf by means of an overhead bucket system. As of 2010, at our own previous visit, the ore chute was still standing near the Santiago Mill. We understand it was reinforced and preserved during environmental remediation work in 2017, but regrettably, it collapsed sometime afterward. Some of the cable is still visible at the Waldorf end between the collapsed entrance of the Big Stevens and the remains of the Santiago Mill water pump. The cable diameter is at least a full inch. Mining in the area ceased during the First World War, in which the United States was involved for most of 1917 and 1918. Mining resumed in the Argentine District sometime afterward. We have not located a date for when Waldorf was fully abandoned, but according to historical accounts, the main mines in Waldorf were shut down sometime before the Second World War, and the town had little other reason to exist at more than 11,000 feet above sea level in a harsh alpine climate. One visitor to the area in 1942, just 1 year prior to the U.S. entering World War II, was historian, artist, and author Muriel Sibel Wall. Her description of the Waldorf town site reads, in part, "We left Georgetown and started for Waldorf, taking the road up the mountain to Green Lake. As we drove the switchbacks, Georgetown lay spread out like a toy village below. The road turned right at a fork where a dingy sign pointed upwards to Waldorf, 5 miles. It was little traveled, its ascent swift and steep, and the going was decidedly rougher. The road wound on over the tundra until it brought us to a cluster of buildings along a street, at the end of which was a mine tunnel. This was Waldorf. A number of houses stood along the one street or perched above or below it on the mountainside. One we recognize as the assay office by its array of cupels and cast iron molds. A photo from 1953 that we located online, author unknown, indicates the town was mostly or entirely abandoned after the war. Between the wars, however, there was a spike in gold prices during the Great Depression, as anyone who still had money was looking for a stable place to park it. Colorado produced far more silver and lead than gold, but gold ores were sometimes found and tended to provide a more reliable payout. Additionally, a new mining technology called froth flotation had been pioneered in Australian mines in 1905, and by the 1930s it was being used worldwide. McClellan Mountain did produce gold in some of the mines, including the Santiago, and with operations shut down in Waldorf, in 1935 an investor had a notion to build a mill at the site of the old ore chute, just a few hundred feet outside the main entrance to the Santiago mine. In terms of technology, it was evidently a transitional design, employing the new method, froth flotation, but also still using the older gravity separation and amalgamation methods for extracting gold, in addition to useful but less valuable materials such as silver and lead. As far as we know, the Santiago Mill continued operating under the original ownership until the War Resources Board issued Order L-208 in late 1942, shutting down nearly all gold mining operations in the U.S. The Santiago was a relatively small-scale operation. The front-end crushing and milling capabilities are low in capacity compared to some of the operations that have been built from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. However, in a twist of fate for the mill, its comparatively small size probably helped make it economic to reopen after Order L-208 was rescinded, ensuring that the buildings and equipment were maintained in good order until final closure in 1983. The original construction is somewhat different than how it appears today. Although 80 years of severe winter weather and occasional vandalism have taken a toll, it is obvious at a glance that some of the windows and door arrangements do not match the building that is still standing now. We will discuss that further in our next episode, but it was this original mill that author Wall saw after passing through Waldorf in 1942. Her description continues again in part. Having been told that the Santiago mine, 2 miles above Waldorf, was being worked, we once more urged the Ford up cruel grades. Here at 12,000-foot elevation, we found the main workings and a general air of activity. Cars were parked alongside the mine office, and electric lights burned in all the sheds and lighted the mine tunnel. The men at the mine seemed pleased that we had come up there and showed us all through the gold mill. It was running at full capacity, and the interior was noisy, dusty, wet, and alive. This made it exciting in a way quite different from the many empty and deserted mills through which I had so frequently prowled. Although I cannot describe the intricate process by which ore is reduced to a dark grayish sand called concentrate, I looked at it respectfully as it lay in its hopper, waiting to be loaded in trucks for the haul to Idaho Springs, and from there to the smelter. We hated to leave the Santiago and the feeling that we were on top of the world. Well, everyone, that's pretty much a wrap for today's episode. I hope that helps place the Santiago Mill more into its historical context so that you can see, as I do, where it kind of fits into Colorado history and why it's so interesting. It's kind of amazing to think of all the effort that went and the money that went into these projects. I mean, the Argentine Central Railroad, building a railroad up to almost 14,000 feet above sea level, and then barely being able to get 10 years of operation out of it. Wow. And all the mines that were built up there. I mean, you saw those pictures of the hillsides, people living in terrible conditions. I mean, we're talking feet of snow in the winter and cold winds and, temperatures down well below 0 Fahrenheit sometimes. And people were up there on that slim chance that they would be the one to get rich. Most didn't. In fact, quite a few lived very hard lives and died poor. But here's something that won't fade in value. This is from Psalm 19, but something that's really interesting, if you've ever spent any time reading the Bible, is it is just full of references to gold and silver and precious stones. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yes, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Truth that doesn't fade when the mine runs out. That's something you can really hang on to. So, hope to see you next time. We'll spend a little more time actually inside the Santiago mine as it appears today, and kind of try and wrap our heads around what it's going to really take to model this thing, to pull dimensions off of it, and actually start laying out equipment. Hope to see you then.
Has anyone seen my phone?